Hello, church. Once again, we are looking into the book of Job to pull some thoughts out from it. Today we'll be talking specifically about the problem of pain and what can we learn from Job's story about the problem of pain, as it's something that we all deal with. First, I want to summarize once again the story of Job and lead to a point of conclusion with his thoughts. Job was a very wealthy man. It says that he was the wealthiest man in the East. And he had X amount of sheep and servants and donkeys and crops, and he had it all, and camels and stuff. He also was a father to a number of children. And his children would often gather together and have big feasts. And the day after, Job would go and he would give sacrifices on behalf of his children in case they had sinned against God the night before. Job was a very good man. He was a righteous man. We'll talk a bit more about his character a little later on there, but he was a good man. And one day, we then shift to the spiritual side of things. God is meeting with his angels. His angels are coming before him. They're giving reports on what they've seen, the work that they've done, the state of the earth, this kind of thing. And there is Satan as well. And God says to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? He's blameless. There's none like him." Satan responds and says that he's only like that because you've given him, health and wealth and happiness and security and all this. And that if those were taken from him, then he would curse God. God then takes Satan up on this bet, as it were. And he says to him, you can go and you can affect his life, just don't touch him. And then after he affects his life, they come back and once again God says, "Have you considered my servant?" And they go about this again, and then Satan is granted the ability to harm Job's actual physical body. He's just not allowed to kill him. And so let's look at that. First of all, Job is out living his daily life, and a servant comes and says, "We were out in the field, and these people came, they attacked. They burned all of your crops, and they killed all the servants. I alone survived to tell you." As he's still speaking, another servant comes running. "Your sheep were taken, and I alone survived to tell you." Another one about the camels. And bit by bit, we go through this, servants coming to give this report. Basically, we see all of Job's resources deplete to nothing. And so he had this great wealth, and now he has nothing. It's a lot worse than that, though. One of his servants comes to him and says, "Your children, they were together. They were having a meal in one of their homes, and a great wind came through the area, and it knocked the house down. The roof collapsed in on them, and all your children are dead. I alone survived to tell you." In a moment, Job went from having so much to having nothing, to having his children plucked from him. If that wasn't bad enough, then Satan gets the ability to physically harm him. And the next scene we have is Job sitting on a pile of ash and debris with sores from the heel of his foot to the crown of his head. And he's scraping his itching body with a piece of broken pottery. And he has nothing. He's so hopeless. Some of his friends, they come around him and they sit there and grieve with him for a week, saying nothing. And then they talk. But when they talk, Job starts to call out and express the broken state that he finds himself in. A sense of hopelessness, regret, despair, depression. Let's look at some of the words that Job says. In Job chapter 3, he calls out and he says, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it." He's calling out and wishing that day had never existed. Or, he says later on in chapter 3, "Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why did the breasts that I should nurse? For then I would have been lain down and been quiet. I would have slept, and then I would have been at rest." He's saying that the level of pain he's at, he would have preferred if he had just simply either never had existed, the day of his birth never had been existent, or that when he had been born, he would have just died there at birth, because then he wouldn't have to go through these troubles. Later on, in chapter 10, he pleads out to God, he calls out to God, and he says, verse 8, "Your hands fashioned me and made me, and now you have destroyed me altogether." And he's recognizing that God had a hand in this. Then he goes on to question, do you not care about me? Do you not love me? Do you not recognize that I was made, by you? 10 verses 18 to 20, "Why did you bring me out of the womb? Would that I had died before any eye had seen me," so that he'd be a stillborn. And would that I had died before any eyes had seen me, and were as though I had not been carried from the womb to the grave. Are not my days few? Then cease and leave me alone, that I may find a little cheer. He calls out also, and he's just asking that he would die, that God would just allow him to be done. He's in quite the state. He says that, and he says a lot more, but we kind of get the picture. His friends then come out, and they attempt to answer the question that we're all asking as we read the story of Job, and at times as we reflect on our own life. And the question's simple. The answer's hard, but the question is simple, and it's why? God, why would you allow this to happen? What was your motive behind this? Why would this man lose everything he had, and then lose his children, and then lose his health, and stand there in desperation wanting to die? His sense of life, the breath in his lungs, feels like a curse to him because he just does not want to be around anymore. He's saying that he wished he had never existed, or that he wished he could have died before all this had happened, and that the grief is too much for him to bear. And some, including one of Job's friends, their response is, well, obviously you're crooked. Obviously there's sin in you. There's something wrong with you. And to a lot of people in the world, we can understand why an evil person would suffer. Or even some take it a step further and they desire that an evil person would suffer, that they think that is good and they want to. But then the question is, well, what about Job? Was he an evil person? The very introduction to the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 1, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil." He doesn't sound to be a man of evilness. He was blameless. He was upright. He feared God and he turned away from evil. He's a good man. Later on, when God actually talks about Job to Satan, he says to him, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" These are the words of God, saying that Job he stands apart from the rest. And so while we might understand or accept the suffering of an evil person, when a good person suffers and is in pain and has their life torn away from them, from sickness and loss and death, despair, depression, we look at that and like Job, we cry out and wonder, why? Why would you allow this to happen? Job's friends attempt to answer the question of why. If you want, you should take some time to read their full responses, but you can even just look at the subtitles. Let me get here. So once again, it starts off with one of his friends talking about, "Do the innocent prosper?" Is that the start? Yes, that's the start. They ask about, do the innocent prosper? And how it's God's blessing is on those who seek him and do well. And so obviously by Job's affliction, there's something wrong there. And he basically presents the health and wealth gospel, which if you know me, I'm strongly against. But he's saying that, if you were right with God, then you would be healthy, you would be wealthy, your children would be still alive. And so it follows logically that because you're sick and your children are dead and your resources are gone, that you're not right before God. And so that's one of the things that one friend says. Other friends, they chip in and they say things. Oh my word, he talks for a while. They do have long talks. Job responds and says that his complaint is just. Another friend, and then he says that he has no hope. Another friend comes in and says that Job should repent, that there's obviously sin in his life that he needs to repent from, that he's in the wrong. One guy comes in and says that, the evil don't prosper. And so it's obvious that Job is evil, that there's something wrong with him. In fact, he says that, and he accuses him of all of these things, that he didn't help widows, that he, put people out and he wasn't a helpful man to them, that he used his resources to oppress people. But Job responds and says, I didn't do those things. And also he responds and says that no, if you look, the evil people in the world, they do prosper. And he says very interesting words, things about how they say to the Almighty, which is God, that we don't need you, get away from us, that your ways are of no interest to us. And he says that in their peace, they go to Sheol. They go to hell, they go into suffering, they go into eternal rest and damnation, but they feel good about it and they're peaceful about it because they've prospered, they've done well for themselves. And I think we see that a lot in the world. We see today, just like in Job's day, we see a lot of people who are evil, but they're doing well in life. And so then we look at a righteous man, a good man like Job, and we ask, why would you allow this to happen to him? And I'm sure that might be a question that you've asked in your own life. As you've faced sickness, as you've watched the pain of the world, you've watched maybe loved ones pass away in pain or in peace, but you wonder, why did they have to leave? Or you look at your resources or your own health or your mental health and all of these other things, and we think, why do I have to suffer? I'm a good person. Or even a step further, I'm a person who follows the ways of God. God, why are you permitting me to suffer? We've talked about this actually quite a bit here at LifeSon. And I'll give four reasons of why this pain could exist. Not to say that there's always an answer. The first one is extremely simple, is we live in a cursed world. In Genesis, we see that man has sinned against God, pushed out of the garden, now we are, and there's sin all about us. And so if your neighbor is evil and pursues the ways of evil and they burn your house down, you're going to lose your house. Not because of something you've done in your life, but because there's evil in the world and people have the free will to choose to do evil. And so they will, and we face the consequences of an evil world. So there's that. Then there's also the idea that suffering actually builds endurance, and it builds character, and it builds quality within us. People go to the gym and they put themselves through physical suffering of lifting heavy weights so that they can get stronger. In the same way, oftentimes God will allow us to go through suffering so that we might become more mentally stronger or emotionally or spiritually stronger. Another time, it could actually be that suffering brings about healing. I've used this example many times before, but if your shoulder is dislocated, it's going to hurt when they put it back in place. Years ago, I broke my finger here sledding at the church. The finger broke and the wrist broke. And in the room, one doctor or nurse or something held one side of my hand, while another doctor or nurse held the finger, and they pulled it back to try to get it to fall back in place. And that really hurt. But they needed to do it to try to get it back how it needed to be. And so sometimes we go through pain because it's necessary to bring about a better level of health, a better level of restoration. If I had just said, no, the pain is too much to bear, I would have a gimped finger and it would hurt more and more and more, and it could lead to a lot more problems. And so I had to go through that pain for them to bring about healing. The other thing could be that God is trying to teach us a lesson. And I can see this in my own life lots of times where I've gone through, whether it's mental struggles or physical pain or a lack of resources, and seeing that God is faithful and He carries me through and He helps me. We talked about that a lot in this last Sunday's sermon where we compared 3 of Jesus' healings. And then also there's the idea that we, in our weakness, have to lean on God's strength. Paul, with his thorn on the flesh, we talked about this before too, but he cried out to God 3 times asking for healing, and God's response to him was, I'm not going to heal you because in your weakness I am made strong. And so oftentimes in our pain and in our suffering or in difficult circumstances, God is allowing that to happen so that we would lean on Him and not on our own. That way, when we come through it, we can say, it was God who got me through, not myself. And we recognize the help and the grace and the blessing that is God and His presence in our life. There's some answers. However, I'll also say that we don't always get to know why we've gone through the pain that we've gone through. In fact, oftentimes it's in retrospect. It's looking back. In most of my life, the pain and suffering in the moment, I'm wondering, why is this happening? And then, years later, or a certain amount of time later, I look back and I can say, I see what God was doing there. I'm glad that He did. It's impressive. It's important. However, we're focusing on Job and his pain, right? And so the question is, why did God allow this to happen? People will give those answers. They'll give answers like Job's friends did. And they'll say that it's because of sin in your life. It's because you're not right with God. Obviously, there's something wrong. Job rebutted against them and said that, no, I'm in the right. I know I'm in the right. I know I didn't do anything that would deserve this suffering. And God actually confirms that. At the end of the story of Job, after God has spoken to Job, granted his request, and then put Job in his place, like we talked about last week, God speaks to Job, repents to God. Job repents to God, and then the Lord rebukes Job's friends. In chapter 42, verse 7, it says, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to, I always butcher his friends' names, Eliphaz, the Temanite, my anger burns against you and against your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. And then he lists these sacrifices that must be made. And then they did that, and Job prayed for them. However, that's the thing, is people often give us wrong answers to why we're going through that pain. And so the question is, Job, why would God have allowed this to happen? He boasts about Job's faithfulness, about his goodness to Satan. And when Satan says that he only loves you because you've put this hedge around him, God just as easily could have said, no, that's not the case. That's not true. Like, God has perfect foreknowledge, so he knows everything that Job could or would have done in any possible logical situation. And so he knows that if he's put through these trials, that he's not going to curse God. In fact, and we'll talk about this another day, Job's response to faithfulness, but he remained faithful to God and blessed God despite the pain that he went through. So why would God allow that to happen? Once again, in retrospect, I think we can see the answer in one of Job's own words. In Job's opening cry, in chapter 3, verse 25, he says something that I think is really important. He says, for the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. A man who had so much, resources, family, health, wealth, and then he lost it all. But there, in his cry, he said, I feared that this was going to happen. I dreaded it. It haunted my mind in a way. I worried that this would take place, and then it did. And I believe that God allowed all of this to happen to teach Job a valuable lesson, that even if Job loses everything he has, he still has God, and God will remain faithful to him and care for him and bring him through all of those problems. At the very end of the story, Job is actually restored. Where were we? And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job, which he had prayed for his friends, when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. But even if he didn't do that, he taught Job the lesson that you can lose all these things that seem important, but if you hold on to me, that's of value. And see, this fear that Job had in his mind of, what if I lose it all? It took away a sense of security he had in the faith of God. And I think sometimes we can look at that too. We look at the things that we have. And I've said before that we come before God and we say, Lord, my life is yours. And that just, it means a lot more than people realize. It means that everything I am, everything I have, my relationships, my goals, my future, my plans, my passions, absolutely everything, physically, mentally, spiritually, futuristically, the hopes and dreams that one has, that those are yours, God. And I imagine there's a lot of us who we say that, and then afterwards our mind kind of goes, what if he actually takes it all? Right? Like I've said, my car is not mine, it's God's. And he allows me to use it. And so I'll use it, and I'll use it to bless his kingdom. But what if I lose my car? Then I'll have to take the bus. That would be inconvenient. That'd be really hard transition. And sometimes people can live in that way where they say, God, I've given you everything that I have. And in the back of their mind, it's, but please don't take it from me. And I think that's where Job was. And so God allowed him to go through this suffering so that after he's restored twice-fold, he can say, look at everything that I have, but if I lose it all, that's okay. I have God. That trumps every possession, every relationship, every sense of security and dream and health that I could hold. If I lose all of that, but my Redeemer lives, then I know I'll be okay. We don't always get to know that answer. And in your life, you're going to continue to go through suffering. Jesus actually promises that. And as we go through pain and struggles and suffering, hold on. And remember, like Job, he goes through this great curse. This thing comes upon him. And he's not knowing what to do. But it says that he worshiped God. I believe it's after the first attack and his children are killed. He takes his property and his children. Then Job arose and tore his robes, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. And then he does say, and naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. When we go through our pain and our struggling, may we not curse God, but rather say, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the Lord. Bless God in all that we do, in our pain, in our suffering. May we remember that we are not alone. God is with us. His hand holds us. Even when it seems that He's not, He's there. And He cares for us. It's easier said than done. I know that. But we can do it. We can have that faith in God and know that He's with us. That's another thought from the book of Job. Next week, we'll look at another area of the story and pull another thought from it. But I hope that this little devotional proves to be helpful to you today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And remember that in your suffering, God is with you right there. Stay faithful. We love you guys. See ya.